Richard Thompson stood frozen in the hospital corridor, his expensive suit making him look completely out of place among the worried families and tired nurses. His hands shook as he stared through the glass window of room 304. Inside, his maid Maria was sitting beside a small hospital bed, gently holding the hand of a little girl who looked exactly like him. The child had his dark hair, his green eyes, and even the same small scar above her left eyebrow that he'd gotten when he was 7. But that wasn't the most shocking part. The most shocking part was what Maria was whispering to the sleeping child. Before we begin the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Please subscribe to my channel for more sweet videos like this. Let the story continue. Daddy will come back soon. Isabella. He doesn't know about you yet, but Mommy is going to tell him very soon. He's going to love you so much. Richard's heart stopped. Daddy? The little girl was calling him Daddy? But how was that possible? He'd never... Wait. 7 years ago. That night with Maria. The night he'd tried so hard to forget. His phone buzzed in his pocket, making him jump. Without thinking, he stepped closer to the window, and that's when Maria looked up. Their eyes met through the glass, and the color drained from her face. She looked terrified, like she'd been caught doing something terrible. The little girl, Isabella, opened her eyes at that moment. She looked directly at Richard through the window, and her small face broke into the biggest smile he'd ever seen. She pointed at him and said something to Maria that made his blood run cold. Maria quickly pulled the curtains shut, but it was too late. Richard had heard what the child said. He had seen the fear in Maria's eyes. And most importantly, he had seen the medical chart hanging at the foot of the bed. The name on the chart read, Isabella Thompson Rodriguez, age 6. His last name. The child had his last name. Richard's mind raced as he stumbled backward from the window. How long had Maria been hiding this from him? How long had he been living in the same house as the mother of his child without knowing it? And why was Isabella in the hospital? Suddenly, a doctor in a white coat approached him. Excuse me, sir. Are you Richard Thompson? Richard nodded, unable to speak. I'm Dr. Martinez. I need to speak with you about your daughter. Isabella's condition is getting worse, and we need to discuss your options. Maria told us you might be coming today. Richard's world spun around him. His daughter, his 6-year-old daughter, who was sick in the hospital. The daughter he never knew existed. The daughter whose mother had been cleaning his house every day for 3 years, watching him live his life while she carried this massive secret. What's wrong with her? Richard managed to whisper, Doctor. Martinez looked at his clipboard with serious eyes. I'm afraid Isabella has a rare blood disease. She needs a bone marrow transplant very soon, or... He didn't finish the sentence, but Richard understood. His daughter, his little girl, was dying. Just then, the curtains flew open again, and Maria stepped out of the room. Her face was red from crying, and she looked like she wanted to run away. But she didn't. Instead, she walked straight toward Richard, and what she said next changed everything he thought he knew about his life. Richard, I need to tell you something that's going to destroy everything you believe about the last 7 years. Isabella isn't just sick. She's been sick for 2 years, and I've been using every penny you pay me to keep her alive. But that's not the worst part. She took a deep breath, and Richard could see her hands shaking. The worst part is that you have another child, a son, and he's missing. 3 hours earlier, Richard had been sitting in his massive office on the 47th floor of the Thompson building, completely unaware that his entire world was about to crumble. He was reviewing contracts for his latest business deal when his assistant knocked on the door. Mr. Thompson, your housekeeper called. She said she won't be able to come to work today because of a family emergency. Richard barely looked up from his papers. Fine. Tell her to take the day off. But something bothered him about this. Maria had never missed a day of work in the 3 years she'd been cleaning his penthouse. Never. She was always there at exactly 8 a.m., quietly moving through his house like a ghost, cleaning everything perfectly without ever bothering him. He realized he knew almost nothing about her personal life. She was quiet, probably in her late 20s, and she always seemed sad about something. But she was the best housekeeper he'd ever had, so he'd never ask questions. Now, for some reason, he couldn't stop thinking about her. What kind of family emergency would make someone so reliable suddenly miss work? By lunchtime, Richard found himself driving toward the address Maria had written on her job application 3 years ago. He told himself he was just being a good employer, checking to make sure she was okay. But deep down, he knew there was another reason. 7 years ago, before he became one of the richest men in the city, Richard had been going through a difficult time. His father had just died, leaving him the family business. He was drinking too much and making bad decisions. One night at a company party, he met a young woman who worked in the building's cleaning crew. Her name was Maria Rodriguez. She was beautiful, kind, and she'd listened to him talk about his problem for hours. One thing led to another, and they'd spent the night together. The next morning, Richard had been so embarrassed and worried about his reputation that he'd given her money and told her to never speak about what happened. He'd thought about her many times over the years, wondering what became of her. But he'd never tried to find her. He'd been too focused on building his empire and protecting his image. Now, as he pulled up the address on Maria's application, he realized it was the same Maria. His maid was the woman he'd spent that night with 7 years ago. The woman he'd treated so badly. The woman who'd been quietly cleaning his house for 3 years, and he'd never even recognized her. But she'd recognize him. Of course she had. She'd been looking at his face every day for 3 years, probably wondering if he remembered her. Probably wondering if he'd figure out why she'd really taken the job. The address led him to a small apartment building in the poorest part of the city. Richard had never been to this neighborhood before. The streets were full of potholes, and most of the buildings looked like they needed repairs. This was where Maria lived. This was where she went home every night after cleaning his $1 million penthouse. He was about to knock on the door of apartment 2B when he heard a woman crying inside. It was Maria's voice, and she was talking to someone on the phone. "Please, Dr. Martinez, there has to be another way. I can't afford another surgery. I've already spent every penny I have. Isabella's getting worse every day, and I don't know what to do." Richard pressed his ear against the door, feeling guilty but unable to stop listening. "I understand that the bone marrow transplant is her only hope, but where am I supposed to get $200,000? I'm just a maid. I make $300 a week, and half of that goes to Isabella's medications." There was a long pause, and then Maria started crying harder. "What do you mean I should contact the father? He doesn't even know Isabella exists. He made it very clear 7 years ago that he never wanted to see me again. He gave me money to disappear, remember? How can I go to him now and tell him he has a daughter who's dying?" Richard felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. The father, she was talking about him. He had a daughter who was dying and needed $200,000 for surgery. I know. I should have told him years ago. But you don't understand what kind of man he is. He's cold and rich and powerful. He probably has lawyers who could take Isabella away from me. What if he tries to get custody? What if he thinks I'm just trying to get money from him? Maria's voice got quieter, and Richard had to strain to hear her. "There's something else, Dr. Martinez. Something I've never told anyone. Isabella isn't my only child. I have a son, too. His name is Diego, and he's 8 years old. He's also Richard's child, from the same night. They're twins. But Diego was born with different medical problems. He's been in and out of hospitals his whole life. Richard's knees almost gave out. Twins. He had twins. Diego went missing 3 days ago. He ran away from the hospital because he was scared about another surgery. The police are looking for him, but I'm so afraid something terrible has happened. I can't lose both of my children. Doctor, I can't." That's when Richard heard Maria hang up the phone and start crying like her world was ending. And that's when he realized that his world was ending too, because he finally understood what he'd done 7 years ago. He'd gotten a woman pregnant and then paid her to disappear. She'd been struggling alone ever since, raising his children, working as his maid to pay for their medical bills, and he'd never even recognized her. Now one of his children was dying and the other was missing. Richard quietly backed away from the door, his mind racing. He had to do something. He had to help. But first, he needed to know more. He needed to see Isabella with his own eyes. He waited in his car until Maria came out of the building. She was dressed in old clothes and carrying a small bag. Her face was red and swollen from crying. She got into an old, beat-up car that barely started and drove away. Richard followed her, keeping his distance. She drove straight to City General Hospital and parked in the visitor's lot. Richard watched her walk to the hospital doors, and then he followed her inside. That's how he found himself standing outside room 304, staring at his daughter for the first time. That's how he learned that Isabella had his last name on her medical chart. That's how he discovered that Maria had been hoping he would come, hoping he would somehow find out about Isabella and help save her life. But now, as Maria stood in front of him in the hospital corridor, telling him that his son was missing, Richard realized that learning about Isabella was just the beginning. The real nightmare was just starting. "Where's Diego?" Richard asked, his voice barely a whisper. Maria looked at him with eyes full of pain and fear. "That's what I've been trying to tell you. He didn't just run away from the hospital. Someone took him, and I think I know who." "What do you mean someone took him?" Richard grabbed Maria's arm, his voice rising. Several nurses turned to look at them, and Maria quickly pulled him into an empty hospital room. "Keep your voice down," she whispered, closing the door behind them. "If they find out you're here, if they find out you know about the children, they'll kill Diego for sure." Richard stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Who are they? What are you talking about?" Maria sat down on a hospital bed, her hands shaking as she pulled out an old cell phone. "Richard, do you remember a man named Carlos Vega? He used to work security at your father's company." The name hit Richard like a slap. Carlos Vega. His father had fired Carlos 15 years ago for stealing money from the company. Carlos had sworn revenge against the Thompson family, but Richard had never taken the threat seriously. What does Carlos have to do with this? Richard asked, though he was starting to get a terrible feeling in his stomach. Maria showed him a text message on her phone. It was from an unknown number, but the message made Richard's blood run cold. "Your boss doesn't know about his kids yet, but I do. If you want to see Diego again, you'll keep your mouth shut. Don't tell Thompson anything or the boy dies. I'll be in touch with my demands soon." "He sent this 2 days ago," Maria said, tears streaming down her face. "Right after Diego disappeared from the hospital. Carlos has been watching us. Richard, he's been watching our family for years, waiting for the right moment to hurt you." Richard felt sick. "How long has he known about the children?" "I think he figured it out when I started working for you 3 years ago. He probably saw me go to your house and got suspicious. Diego looks exactly like you did when you were a child. Anyone who knew your family would recognize him immediately." Richard paced around the small room, his mind racing. "Why didn't you tell me this when Diego first went missing? Why didn't you call the police?" Maria laughed bitterly. "Call the police? Richard, you don't understand. Carlos isn't just some angry ex-employee. After your father fired him, he got involved with very dangerous people. He's been planning this revenge for years." She pulled out a newspaper clipping from her bag. The headline read, "Local man dies in suspicious car accident." There was a photo of a man Richard didn't recognize. This was Miguel Santos. He was a security guard at the hospital where Isabella gets her treatments. 3 months ago, he told me he'd seen Carlos asking questions about my children. Miguel said he was going to report it to the police. Richard looked at the date on the newspaper clipping. This accident happened 3 months ago. "It wasn't an accident," Maria whispered. "Carlos killed him, and he'll kill Diego too if we don't do exactly what he says." Just then, Maria's phone buzzed. She looked at it, and her face went completely white. "He's texting me now." Richard read the message over her shoulder. "I hope you're enjoying your reunion with Daddy. Yes, I know he's at the hospital. I've been watching. Here's what's going to happen. Thompson will transfer $5 million to my account by tomorrow night, or I'll make sure he never sees his son again. And just to show I'm serious, check your email." Maria's hands were shaking so badly she could barely open her email. When she finally did, both she and Richard gasped in horror. The email contained a photo of Diego. The 8-year-old boy was tied to a chair in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. His face was bruised, and he was holding a newspaper from today's date. But what made Richard's heart stop was the look of absolute terror in his son's eyes. "Oh my God," Richard whispered. "What has he done to him?" Maria was crying so hard she could barely speak. "Diego is so scared of hospitals and doctors because of all his medical problems. He's just a little boy, Richard. He probably doesn't even understand what's happening to him." Richard felt a rage building inside him unlike anything he'd ever experienced. This monster had kidnapped his son, his 8-year-old son who was already sick and afraid. "We have to call the police," Richard said, reaching for his phone. "No." Maria grabbed his hand. "Don't you understand? Carlos has people everywhere. He knew you were at the hospital before we even saw each other. He's been planning this for years. If we involve the police, Diego will die." Richard wanted to argue, but then he looked at the photo again. Diego looked so small and helpless. He looked exactly like Richard had when he was 8 years old. The same dark hair, the same green eyes, the same stubborn chin. "I'll pay the money," Richard said. $5 million is nothing compared to Diego's life. But Maria shook her head. "It's not about the money, Richard. Don't you see? Carlos doesn't just want your money. He wants to destroy you completely. He wants to take away everything you love, just like he believes you and your father took away everything you loved." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that even if you pay the $5 million, he's not going to let Diego go. He's going to keep asking for more money, and eventually he's going to kill Diego anyway. And then he's going to come after Isabella." Richard felt like he was drowning. "Then what do we do?" Maria stood up and walked to the window. Outside, they could see the city skyline, with the Thompson building rising above all the other skyscrapers. Richard's empire. His legacy. Everything he'd worked for his entire life. "There's only one way to save Diego," Maria said quietly. "We have to give Carlos what he really wants." "Which is?" Maria turned around, and Richard saw a look in her eyes that frightened him more than anything else that had happened today. "He wants to destroy you, Richard. He wants to take away your business, your reputation, your freedom, everything. I don't understand. Carlos has been collecting evidence for years. Evidence of illegal business, deals your father made. Evidence of bribes, tax evasion, fraud. Things that could send you to prison for the rest of your life." Richard felt the room spinning around him. "That's impossible. My father was an honest businessman." "No, he wasn't. And Carlos is proof. He's been waiting for the right moment to use it. And now he has the perfect leverage. He'll trade Diego's life for your confession to all of your father's crimes." "But I didn't commit those crimes. I was just a child when my father made those deals." "It doesn't matter. You inherited the business, which means you inherited the legal responsibility. If Carlos releases his evidence, you'll lose everything. Your company, your money, your freedom. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison." Richard sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was facing. Lose everything to save his son, or keep his empire and let his child die. But then he thought about Isabella, lying in that hospital bed, needing $200,000 for surgery. If he went to prison, who would pay for her treatment? Who would take care of Maria? Who would protect his family? "There has to be another way," he said desperately. Maria's phone buzzed again. This time, the message was even more terrifying. "Time's up for thinking. I want an answer in 1 hour. Send Thompson to the old Thompson Steel warehouse on 5th Street. Come alone, or the boy dies. And Maria, if you think about calling the police, remember that I have friends watching Isabella's hospital room right now." Maria showed Richard the message, and they both looked toward the door, suddenly realizing that Isabella was in danger too. "We have to get her out of here," Richard said, standing up quickly. But when they opened the door to rush back to Isabella's room, they found 2 men in black suits standing in the hallway. They were pretending to read magazines, but Richard could see the bulges of weapons under their jackets. Carlos wasn't just watching them. He had people positioned throughout the hospital, ready to hurt Isabella if Richard didn't cooperate. "What do we do now?" Richard whispered. Maria looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Now you have to choose, Richard. Your empire or your children. You can't save both." But as they stood there, trapped in a hospital corridor with armed men watching their every move, Richard realized that Maria was wrong about one thing. There was another option, a dangerous, desperate option that could either save his family or get them all killed. Actually, Richard said quietly, there might be a way to save everyone, but it's going to require us to do something that could destroy us all. Richard pulled Maria back into the empty hospital room and closed the door. Listen to me carefully. We're going to save both children, but we need to act fast. How? Maria asked, hope and fear battling in her voice. Carlos made one mistake. He's so focused on revenge that he doesn't realize I've been preparing for something like this my whole life. Richard pulled out his phone and showed Maria a special app. This connects me directly to a private security team. Not police, private contractors who work outside the law. Maria's eyes widened. You mean exactly like what Carlos is using? My father taught me that in business, you have to be ready for anything, including people who want to destroy you. Richard pressed a button on the app, and within seconds, he was connected to a man named Marcus Stone. Marcus had been Richard's secret weapon for years, handling problems that regular law enforcement couldn't touch. Richard, what do you need? Marcus's voice was calm and professional. I need a full tactical team at City General Hospital in 20 minutes. My children are in danger, and I need you to extract them safely. How many targets are we dealing with? Richard looked out the door at the two men in black suits. At least 2 here at the hospital. Probably more at the warehouse location. But Marcus, there's something else. They have my son at the old Thompson Steel warehouse. I need you to coordinate a simultaneous rescue. That's a complex operation, Richard. It'll require splitting my team. I don't care what it costs. I need both children safe. As Richard talked to Marcus, Maria was pacing the room, her mind racing. Richard, what if this goes wrong? What if Carlos hurts Diego when he realizes what we're doing? That's why we're not going to let him realize it, Richard said, ending the call with Marcus. We're going to make him think he's winning right up until the moment we take him down. Richard explained his plan. He would go to the warehouse meeting as Carlos demanded, but he wouldn't go alone. Marcus and his team would be positioned around the building, ready to move in when Richard gave the signal. At the same time, another team would secure the hospital and get Isabella to safety. But what about the evidence Carlos has against your father? Maria asked. Even if we save the children, he could still destroy your business. Richard smiled grimly. Let him try. I've spent the last 10 years cleaning up my father's messes. Every illegal deal, every bribe, every questionable transaction. I've been systematically fixing them or finding legal ways to justify them. Carlos's evidence is 15 years old. Most of it is worthless now. But some of it isn't, is it? Maria could see the worry in Richard's eyes. Some of it could still cause problems. But I'd rather lose my business than lose my children. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Richard and Maria froze, but it was Dr. Martinez. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said, stepping into the room. But I need to speak with you about Isabella's condition. It's getting worse faster than we expected. Richard felt his heart sink. What do you mean? She needs a bone marrow transplant within the next 48 hours. Or we're going to lose her. I know this is a difficult time with your son missing, but we need to start the procedure immediately. Do it, Richard said without hesitation. Whatever it costs, whatever you need, just save her. Dr. Martinez nodded. There's one more thing. We need to test you and your son Diego to see if either of you is a bone marrow match. Without a family member donor, Isabella's chances are much lower. The cruel irony hit Richard like a punch to the gut. Diego wasn't just missing. He might be the key to saving Isabella's life. They needed to rescue him not just because he was her son, but because his sister would die without him. We'll find Diego, Richard promised. Just get Isabella ready for surgery. As Dr. Martinez left, Richard's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Teams in position. The hospital is secure. Warehouse team ready. Waiting for your signal. Richard looked at Maria. Are you ready for this? I'm terrified, she admitted. But yes. Let's bring our children home. They left the hospital through a side exit, avoiding the men in black suits who were still watching the main entrance. Marcus's team had already neutralized the threats at the hospital, but they'd done it so quietly that Carlos probably didn't know yet. The drive to the warehouse felt like the longest 20 minutes of Richard's life. Maria sat beside him, clutching a photo of Diego and Isabella together. It was the first time Richard had seen a picture of his children as a family. "They're so beautiful," he whispered. "Diego is a protective older brother, even though he's only 2 minutes older than Isabella," Maria said, trying to stay calm. "He always tells her that everything will be okay, even when he's scared too." Richard thought about all the years he'd missed, all the birthdays, first steps, first words, bedtime stories, all the moments that Carlos was trying to use as weapons against him. "After this is over," Richard said, "I want to be a real father to them. I want to be part of their lives." "They were like that," Maria said quietly. "They've always wondered about their daddy." When they arrived at the warehouse, Richard could see Carlos's men positioned around the building. But he also knew that Marcus's team was out there too, invisible and ready to strike. That Richard's phone buzzed with a final message from Carlos. "Come inside alone. If I see anyone else, Diego dies." Richard looked at Maria. "Stay in the car. Whatever happens, don't come inside until Marcus give the all clear." "Richard, what if Dash—" "No, we're going to get Diego back. And then we're going to save Isabella. I promise." Richard walked toward the warehouse entrance, his heart pounding. He could feel the weight of everything he'd learned in the past few hours. He was a father. He had 2 children who needed him, and he was about to risk everything to save them. The warehouse door creaked open, and Richard stepped inside. The building was dark and filled with shadows, but he could hear voices coming from the back. As he walked deeper into the warehouse, he saw Carlos Vega standing next to a chair where Diego was tied up. Richard's son looked up at it with those familiar green eyes, and Richard felt his heart break and fill with love at the same time. "Daddy," Diego whispered. "Hello, son," Richard said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "I'm here to take you home." Carlos laughed coldly. How touching. The great Richard Thompson finally meets his bastard children. "Tell me, Richard, how does it feel to know that your maid has been raising your kids in poverty while you lived in luxury?" "Let him go, Carlos. You want me, not him." "Oh, I want both of you. But first, I want you to understand what you're going to lose." Carlos pulled out a gun and pointed it at Diego. "You're going to confess to all of your father's crimes. You're going to give me $50 million. And then you're going to watch me destroy everything you've built. And if I do all that, you'll let Diego go? Maybe. Or maybe I'll kill him anyway, just to make sure you understand how much I hate your family." That's when Richard realized that Maria had been right. Carlos was never going to let Diego go. This was about more than money or revenge. This was about pure hatred. Richard raised his hand slowly, as if he was surrendering, but he was actually giving Marcus the signal to move in. "You're right, Carlos. I do deserve to lose everything, but you made one mistake." "What's that?" "You threatened my children." The warehouse exploded into action. Marcus's team came through the windows and doors simultaneously, moving with military precision. Carlos spun around in shock, but it was too late. Within seconds, his men were down and Carlos was on the ground, his gun knocked away. Richard ran to Diego and cut the ropes binding him. His son threw his arms around his neck and held on tight. "I knew you would come," Diego whispered. "I told the bad man that my daddy was a hero." Richard felt tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. "I'm so sorry, Diego. I'm so sorry I wasn't there before." "It's okay, Daddy. Mommy said you would find us when we needed you most." But even as Richard held his son, he knew their problems weren't over. Carlos was captured, but Isabella was still dying in the hospital. And Richard had just discovered that being a father meant that the hardest battles were still ahead. "Come on, son," Richard said, lifting Diego in his arms. "Let's go save your sister." The hospital room was filled with tension as Richard, Maria, and Diego waited for the bone marrow test results. Isabella was getting weaker by the hour, and the doctors had made it clear that this was their last chance. The results are in, Dr. Martinez said as he entered the room. Diego, you're a perfect match for your sister. Diego, who had been quietly holding Isabella's hand, looked up at the doctor with serious 8-year-old eyes. Does that mean I can save her? Yes, it does. But I need to explain what the procedure involves. You'll need to have surgery too, and it might be uncomfortable. Diego didn't hesitate. I want to do it. Isabella is my sister. I would do anything for her. Richard felt his heart swell with pride. This brave little boy, his son, was willing to undergo surgery to save his sister's life. At 8 years old, Diego was showing more courage than Richard had ever shown in his entire life. When can we do the surgery? Richard asked. We need to prepare both children immediately. The procedure will take several hours, and there are risks involved. What kind of risks? Maria asked, her voice full of worry. Doctor Martinez looked serious. For Diego, the risks are minimal but real. For Isabella, this is her only chance. If the transplant doesn't work, we'll lose her. As they prepared the children for surgery, Richard pulled Dr. Martinez aside. Doctor, I need to ask you something. 3 days ago, you told Maria that she should contact the children's father about Isabella's condition. Did you know that I was a father? Dr. Martinez smiled sadly. Mr. Thompson, I've been Isabella's doctor for 2 years. I've seen Maria struggle to pay for every treatment, every medication, every hospital stay. She works 3 jobs to afford your daughter's care, and she's never once complained or asked for help. But did you know I was a father? I suspected. Isabella and Diego both have your eyes, your smile, your stubborn personality. But more than that, Maria talks about you constantly. She would tell the children stories about their father, about how smart he was, how successful he was, how much he would love them if he knew about them. Richard felt tears in his eyes. She talked about me? She's never stopped loving you, Mr. Thompson. Even after all these years, even after everything that happened between you, she believed that someday you would find your way back to your family. As the children were taken into surgery, Richard sat in the waiting room with Maria. For the first time in 7 years, they were alone together and talking honestly about what had happened between them. I'm sorry, Richard said quietly. I'm sorry for how I treated you that night. I'm sorry for not recognizing you when you came to work for me. I'm sorry for not being there for Diego and Isabella. Maria looked at him with tears in her eyes. Richard, do you know why I really took the job as your maid? To be close to me? Yes, but not for the reason you think. I wasn't trying to trap you or get money from you. I was trying to understand you. I wanted to know what kind of man you had become, because I needed to know if you were someone I could trust with our children's lives. And what did you decide? I decided that you were still the same man I fell in love with 7 years ago. You were just lost and afraid, like I was. I watched you for 3 years, Richard. I saw how you treated your employees, how you donated money to charities, how you helped people even when you didn't have to. I knew that when you found out about Diego and Isabella, you would love them. Richard took her hand. I do love them. I love them more than I ever thought possible. And Maria, I need you to know something. That night 7 years ago wasn't just a mistake to me. I never forgot about you. I thought about you all the time. Then why didn't you try to find me? Because I was a coward. I was afraid of what people would think. Afraid of ruining my reputation. Afraid of admitting that I cared about someone who wasn't from my world. Maria smiled through her tears. Our children don't care about reputation or social status. They just want a father who loves them. They have that. They'll always have that. 6 hours later, Dr. Martinez emerged from the operating room with news that would change everything. Both surgeries were successful. Diego is resting comfortably, and the bone marrow transplant appears to have been accepted by Isabella's body. It will take time to know for certain, but her blood work is already showing improvement. Richard and Maria hugged each other, crying with relief and joy. Their children were going to be okay, but the biggest surprise was yet to come. The next morning, as Richard was sitting beside Diego's hospital bed, his son opened his eyes and smiled at him. Daddy, I had the most amazing dream. I dreamed that you and Mommy got married and we all lived together in a big house, and Isabella, and I never had to worry about being sick anymore. Richard looked at Maria, who was sitting beside Isabella's bed. She was looking at him with the same love he'd seen in her eyes 7 years ago. Diego, Richard said carefully, how would you feel if that dream came true? Diego's eyes got wide. Really? You mean it? I mean it. If your mother will have me, I want us to be a real family. Maria walked over to Richard and took his hand. Richard Thompson, are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to give me the chance to be the husband and father I should have been 7 years ago. I'm asking you to let me spend the rest of my life making up for all the time I miss. Yes, Maria whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Isabella, who had been listening with her eyes closed, opened them and smiled. Does this mean Daddy is going to live with us now? Yes, baby girl. Daddy is going to live with us now. But the real miracle wasn't just that the family was reunited. The real miracle was what happened next. Richard sold the Thompson building and used the money to start a foundation for children with rare diseases. He and Maria moved into a beautiful house with a big yard where Diego and Isabella could play safely. Richard learned to be a hands-on father, helping with homework, reading,